to thank the candidates, Paul Koretz and David Vahedi, and thank you for your public service. And thank you to all the coalition reps who are in the trenches every day protecting their neighborhoods. We have 63 questions today, boiled down from 90 plus. I stopped counting. They're divided into 6 categories. Vision for the controller's office, identifying waste, corruption, and malfeasance. Number 3 is public safety. Number 4 is transparency and data tools. Number 5 is quality of life issues. Number 6 is administrative and additional items. And then time permitting, we'll take questions from the chat box. By the way, just so you know, Ron Galprin sent me quite a few questions. So I found that interesting, and I incorporated his questions into this question set. Okay, so here's how we'll do it. I'll ask a question and tell you how much time you have, Paul and David, and then you know, and then when 15 seconds are up, I'll hold up a card that says 15. And when you all your time is for a question for an answer has elapsed, I will hold up a stop, and then you have to stop talking. I want to thank Eduardo, my husband, for doing the timekeeping again. What a trooper. Please respond directly to the questions succinctly and with no rambling. Questions will be asked of candidates in alphabetical order on a rotation basis, so no one is always asked first or always asked last. Mike Eveloff will co-moderate with me, and he will do various question sets also. Okay, so here's the first question. The legal, and we're going to start with Paul on this. Okay. The legal description for the office of city controller is to conduct independent audits, manage the city's payroll and spending, report on the city's finances, and provide city metrics and data online. Please elaborate on this legal description and describe the job of controller as you envision it. Paul first, then David. You have 1 minute to answer this question.
Well, thank you for having me today. I think there are 3 key areas in which the elected controller provides leadership. One is to identify efficiencies and cost savings, which has been one of my greatest areas of focus in the 12 years I've been on the council, partly because I came on in the recession, and the way to fight off the 4,000 layoffs that were proposed was to find efficiencies and cost savings, which I have continued to work on through the rest of my council career. The second most important function is to perform policy audits to help identify the ways in which the city can run better and propose legislative changes to the way city departments and policies function. Lastly, the most important function is transparency, which Controller Galprin has done an incredible job.
Time.
Suggesting ways to do.
David, up to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Saturday and allowing me to share my ideas and vision of the Controller's office as we go forward. Dead on, Marcia, on your description. I think we all get that the Controller's office is supposed to be independent, transparent, and going after the waste and the fraud. And now, unfortunately, in the last several years, we see tremendous corruption. And this corruption has seeped into almost every single department within the city of LA, from the DWP to the building and safety. So as your controller, I'm the first controller to have an advanced degree in accounting. I'm the first controller that's conducted over 350 audits. And I will bring that on day one, that experience, to make sure that not only are we picking the audits that we can get done as quick as possible, but the audits that will make the biggest difference in the quality of life in the city of Los Angeles residents and businesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how will you use the controller's office to improve the quality of life for homeowners and residents? 1 minute. Start with David.
So as I mentioned, number one, we have to fight the corruption in the city, because when we have people out there in positions of power enriching themselves instead of doing the work of the people, we can't get the work of the people done. So for example, one of my proposals is to make sure that ethics is recording donations in real time. Let's create a hotline in the controller's office and let's fund it with a reward program, $50,000 reward for any information leading to indictments. It's greed that's causing this corruption. Let's use greed to fight the corruption. There are so many things that we can do in the controller's office and through the City Ethics Commission to fight this. I know some candidates have thrown up their hands and saying there's nothing we can do about the corruption, but I think until we hit the corruption first, we can't move on. Second of all, Marcia, I've shared with you, there are many low-hanging fruits that we can cut the waste. For example, trash cans in the city hall. Thank you.
Paul?
Could you repeat that question again, please?
How will you use the controller's office to improve the quality of life for homeowners and residents in LA?
Well, I would continue to do things like that I've done in the last few years in fighting state legislation like SB 9 and 10, where I was one of the state leaders for the last few years in combating Senator Wiener's efforts to destroy our quality of life in single-family neighborhoods and take away zoning options. Much of what I did was as a council member, but frankly, a lot of what I'm doing in that arena is as an individual private citizen. I'm one of the leaders in creating the initiative to take back zoning and planning rights and overturn SB 9 and 10. So those are some of the kinds of areas. I also have the toughest proposal on corruption. I'm suggesting that we invite the FBI every few years in to do stings to make sure that everyone knows it's dangerous to corruption.
Okay. So if you're elected controller, tell me your 3 highest priorities and just bullet them off, 45 seconds. We'll start with Paul.
She always does.
My 3 highest priorities are dealing with the issues that we deal with already. Finishing off the COVID crisis and suggesting improved ways that we can do that. Auditing all of our homeless programs, looking at the things we do well and the things that we do poorly and changing our focus. Also dealing with public safety and crime, how we can do that in a more effective way, but also how we can look at LAPD, which I've done throughout my career, and have dozens of suggestions, some of which have been implemented to make them more efficient and effective.
Time. Okay, David?
Thank you. So number one has to be to look at how we're spending money on the homelessness issue. We've been very generous. We've passed the Prop H, we've passed the county sales tax. We even have the legislature charging $75 every time we record a document that's bringing hundreds of millions of dollars in. And so a lot of other jurisdictions have found ways to combat homelessness at a much cheaper rate. For example, the city of LA built in North Hollywood small homes at $132,000 per unit. That's $2,000 a square foot. We're all shocked and stunned by that. And if we can get our money to work quicker and better, we can make a better quality of life. Also audit the DWP, LADBS.
Time. Stop. Can whoever is Let's Go Rams, can you tell me who you are, please?
Stacy, sure. I'm changing it to my name.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Welcome aboard. Okay, thank you. Okay, where am I? Okay, so we've had those answers. Okay, next question. Name 2 large-scale audits that you have conducted and just bullet them off. You have 30 seconds. And we'll start with you, David.
So in the 90s, I fought organized crime in the fuel industry in California. They were stealing over $200 million a year. And my audit of the industry resulted both in legislation change at the Capitol and in many indictments and incarcerations convictions.
Number two.
Number two, I had the honor, and these are sometimes the smaller audits are the most important, to audit our homeowner board. And I did it a way that everybody felt was not only fair and transparent, but also very efficient.
Okay, thank you. Paul, what audits, name two large-scale audits that you have personally conducted?
Well, first of all, I'd mention in response to Mr. Vahedi's previous answer that the tiny homes that were built in North Hollywood, I immediately did a motion to have us take a close look at those tiny homes and drop the cost.
Paul, you're not answering the question. What two large-scale audits have you conducted that you led?
Well, that's a completely biased question because only an auditor can answer that question. And obviously Ty is the only auditor included in this. I've reviewed many audits as chair of the two committees that have had.
Okay, so Paul, is your answer none?
My answer is whatever I say when I'm answering a question, then you're interrupting.
Okay, but you're not
Would you
answering
like
the
to give me
question.
my time? No, I'm not answering it the way you want me to. The answer is I'm not an auditor. I am the person that reviews audits for the city of Los Angeles, and I've done that in many cases, but I can't claim to have performed an audit because I'm not an auditor.
Okay. Next question. What is your approach to choosing the subject of audits? 1 minute. We start with Paul.
Well, my approach would be looking at the most pressing issues before the city. So needless to say, my first audit where I think the most value would be is in auditing our homeless programming. And second, I would audit LASA, which I think has been an agency that doesn't cooperate with us and provides us much less effectiveness than the money that goes into it. My second audit would be looking at the LAPD and looking at where we can find many areas that could be more efficient, which I have done for the past 12 years and would continue to do as city controller. I would continue to focus on the next most important issues until we run out of them, and then I would start looking at the departments that I think are the most problematic and how they could function more effectively.
Thank you. David? David, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Marcia. As an auditor, you should be able to handle 6, 7, 8 audits at a time. One of the things I want to do with the controller's office is I want to have a very vibrant intern program so we can do even more work while giving people experience in the college level. We've seen in the last 2 weeks definitive evidence that $91 million was stolen at the DWP. I think that's the tip of the iceberg of what's going on over there. So I think that is an audit. But again, we can do 8, 9 audits at a time. We can't wait. You know, we have to attack these problems, you know, now and I apologize, right now. And so, yes, we'll do multiple audits, DWP, LADBS, LAPD, and the homeless,
15.
and anything else.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, when will you use your subpoena power? 1 minute. Start with David.
So while we'd always like to get information in the most friendly way, as an experienced attorney, I can tell you that when somebody is faced with indictment and information being disclosed that will lead to criminal charges, they will fight tooth and nail. So, you know, my first standard would be to try to get the information voluntarily and give a short 15 to 30 day time limit. And upon the expiration of that time, I would issue the subpoena for the information. I've issued over 95 subpoenas for the state in criminal investigations. And sometimes it's hard to serve them. Hopefully in the city of LA, we'll be able to find our general managers in their office to serve them, but it will be used as a last resort, but used.
Okay, Paul?
I have to give a similar answer. I mean, it really has to be a last resort. I think there are not many situations where that is called for. And certainly a lot of the controller's work is in analyzing the city functions. Hopefully you don't need a subpoena to get a city employee to testify. A lot of our work is with our own figures and financial data, but certainly if there is information that we can't get in any other way, I wouldn't be hesitant to use the subpoena power.
Okay. Now we're going to go to, excuse me, waste, corruption, and malfeasance. How will you use the controller's office to address the homelessness problem and the city's response to it? Paul, 60 seconds.
Well, there are so many different things that can be done to address homelessness. I think there has to be a focus on our building programs and how we still haven't prioritized HHH projects as highly as we should, and we still haven't streamlined the process as much as we should. But my focus has been largely, and would be as controller, on things we can do that don't require slow building. Things like family reunification, which is done but not done extensively, which is the quickest and cheapest and most humane approach. Also, there are things like the fact that we can track our affordable housing within market rate housing.
15.
So I demanded that we do this. I was told it was impossible. I pushed for an extensive period of time. Now we have a database of all of our affordable housing market rate, and we can make sure those are rented to the right people.
Time. David?
Number one job of a controller in the city of Los Angeles is to hold people accountable. We're 8 years into a homelessness crisis, and it's not getting better. More people are becoming homeless than we are able to get shelter for. We've spent now almost a third of the Prop HH money, and I submit to you that anybody that believes we're going to be able to build $500 to $1 million homes and get out of this problem is just not understanding the reality of it. The bottom line is, this is a national problem. 40% of our homeless in California, especially Los Angeles, came from out of state or became homeless shortly after coming here. We need to treat this like a FEMA response. That's how my audits will approach this. I've made suggestions, why don't we buy some used cruise ships and put them in San Pedro away from residents to give people mental health treatment? Why haven't we opened St. Vincent Hospital? If we don't treat the drug addiction and mental illness first.
Okay, next question. How will you use the controller's office to address the issue and identify problems with affordable housing? I'm going to ask both you guys to answer the question, okay? The controller's office is not a policy-making role. So please answer the question of what you would do as controller and with the controller's office. So how will you use the controller's office to address the issue of affordable housing? David, you're first.
Sure. Marcia, in the last 7 years.
Wait, 1 minute.
Okay. In the last 7 years, the city council has added on linkage fees, asphalt restoration fees, lid fees. And what we've done is just created additional costs to get housing built. And we're surprised why developers are going for at-cost market. We have to create a proposal in the controller's office through doing research of different jurisdictions and show the policymakers on the city council where we can cut the fees and the costs. And at the same time, find carrots to get developers to do these projects. We're not talking about the Prop HH funds. We're talking about real units built at the $200,000 level that people can afford with low-income jobs.
Paul?
Well, I still think we need to focus more on the steps that we can take that don't require building, as well as looking at all the steps that can improve the process of building and make it more efficient. there are things we need to do to keep people from becoming homeless in the first place, like continuing to implement the program that I created for eviction defense, so that we keep people from losing their homes and winding up on the street in the first place. The things that we do to identify the sources of homelessness and preempt them, I think will provide the greatest effectiveness. And I think that is something the controller should be seeking.
Okay. Next question. Which 3 areas of city government pose the most waste? You have a minute, 60 seconds. Paul, you're first.
One thing I think is an issue area is LAPD, and this is not to be critical of LAPD, but I think there are a lot of places where efficiencies could be found, and I've pushed for them and will continue to do so.
But what are the 3 areas? You had LAPD. What's another one?
Certainly our homeless programming would be a second area. Requires incredible analysis to make the changes that I think we need. And I think the third area is the area of climate change. We have so many sustainability programs and different steps. I couldn't tell you right now whether all of them are being implemented, how well they're being implemented. And we believe it's estimated that by 2030, we hit a point of no return. So that would give me as controller 8 years to focus on pushing these programs forward and making them more efficient.
Stop. Thank you. David?
I think there's a tremendous amount of waste and efficiency at the LA Department of Building and Safety. This is an important area because even though the controller doesn't decide what type of project is built, when a project takes 4 to 5 months longer to be built, we lose a tremendous amount of our property tax revenue. We get 24% of our revenue from property tax. Number 2, homelessness. And number 3, sanitation.
Thank you. Okay, please tell us your plan to help eradicate pay to play in City Hall. Please provide details. You have 1 minute.
Who's first?
Oh, who's first? David.
So as I mentioned earlier, the controller's office will have a real-time database that will tell you exactly who is donating and what project they're relating to. I'm hoping the city council will eventually ban developers. I know that one of the problems stated by the council was they're afraid they were still going to take donations from developers that they weren't supposed to. So I believe my database, real-time, working with ethics, will solve that problem. Number 2, I'm going to require all elected officials, including myself, to post our calendars weekly. This information is available through Freedom of Information. So if I can't get it voluntarily, I'll get it through the Freedom of Information. Number 3, we're going to have ethics look at filings and make sure when filings are done. So for example, if a candidate sends out a mailer and there's an issue, we will catch it in real time. And then also with independent expenditures. Okay. And that way we're bringing additional light to the problem.
Okay. Diana, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself. Jan, could you please mute yourself also? And I don't know how to, I could do that.
Yes.
I'm going to mute you. Okay. And let's see, who else isn't? Okay, I don't know what that she's on the phone. I can't mute her. Okay. Paul, you're up.
Well, as some of you may recall, David Rue and I introduced a number of motions to try and deal with the issues that Mr. Vahedi is speaking of. None of them went anywhere, and frankly, they would be of modest help, but the real corruption is done out of sight. And if you have a council member, which is still hard for me to believe, but it appears to be true, that was asking for $500,000 bribes at a time. The fact that you're not allowing developers to give $800 contributions is really not going to have any impact. The corruption is behind closed doors. There's some modest issues that you may pick off by
15.
shining a light on them. What I think we really need to do is to bring in outside folks like the FBI and have them try to pick up where this is happening in departments and with elected officials.
Stop. Okay. So are there 3 audits that you would do to eliminate the pay to play in this city? 1 minute. Paul, 3 audits that would eliminate the pay to play.
I'm not sure that I really believe audits would eliminate it, but one could take a look at contributions from elected officials, from developers to elected officials and other special interests, and just shine a light on it. Although, frankly, this group has done that to some degree as well. One could look at contracts, certainly, and votes on contracts and see if there are any connections to past contributions. But I don't, honestly, I don't believe this is a problem that can be audited away.
Okay. David?
I do think the audits could be very helpful, Marcia, but ultimately the information the controller presents has to be widely distributed, and then it becomes up to leaders, community leaders like yourself, to make sure that the toes are put to the fire. And what I mean by that is we saw a council member in Mid-City approve a large project and then a large outdoor digital advertising, and then received $150,000 campaign contribution to an independent committee. And so as your controller, I promise you that you will have the information in real time and you will be able to make your voice heard. At the end of the day, it's the voice of the people that will make a difference in this pay for play scheme.
Okay.
But I also want to just add, as I mentioned, I do believe a $50,000 reward for information leading to indictments. We have to use the greed against the corruption. And once that hotline is up, we will make a difference.
Okay. Paul, can you turn off your phone, please? Is your phone on?
No.
Okay, somebody's binging here. And whoever it is, could you please mute yourself or turn off your phone or something else? Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to do an audit of this meeting and find out who the culprit is. Here's another flavor of corruption. The city does not enforce its own ordinances. Please tell us what audit you will do to illuminate the extent to which the city does not enforce its own ordinances. 1 minute. David, you're first.
Well, we're seeing in, for example, the DWP, the asphalt ordinance, that they're charging customers for a certain amount of asphalt and not delivering it. And that is upsetting because at the bottom, we have to reinstill faith in government and make sure that whatever our city has set as rules, they are following it. But I think that's a great question that we can look at every department and make sure that the ordinances that we've supported as residents and voters are actually implemented.
Paul?
Well, I think the best example and the most counterproductive is our lack of enforcement of our marijuana dispensary regulations, because we still, years later, have a number of illegal marijuana dispensaries, and we are losing much more in revenue than it would cost us to just enforce adequately and eliminate all of them. And yet it's been impossible for me to make any progress on getting the city to do that. I think an audit is absolutely in order. And I think a certain amount of outside pressure on the council to finally enforce this, not allow criminal activity to be going on across the city, and to actually fill our coffers at the same time is something that has to be done.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the planning department, what audits would you do and what white papers would you write about the planning department? 1 minute. Paul, you're first.
Well, I have some frustrations with the planning department. I also have to work with them, but certainly on the issues of local control, I don't think that they have been moving in the right direction. I think they also have a TOC program that has contributed to homelessness by allowing low-income people in units to be forced out and to be replaced by luxury housing. And it's contributed to the number of people that we have on the street. We've lost around 27,000 people due to them being Ellised out of their rent-controlled units. And I think our own programs,
15.
Including the TOC program, which allowed through JJJ, the planning director is allowed to create it, is actually causing us to lose more affordable housing. And that should be audited.
Okay, thank you. David?
Thank you, Marcia. So number one, I want to look at the rotating door policy where we have people working at planning leave the department and then immediately become lobbyists. There's laws that need to be followed requiring them to stay out of projects they've worked on for life and up to 12 months if they haven't worked on a project. This rotating door is allowing a lot of T's not to be crossed and I's to not to be dotted. Second of all, we have to look at what the TOC says, what JJJ said in its language. And as an attorney, I can decipher that and make sure that the planning department is applying the law correctly. I've seen throughout government agencies expand what they can do under the law. And I will make sure that not only
15.
Yes, thank you. Not only that, make sure that we are keeping them within the spirit of law, but make sure they're following the law.
Okay, thank you. Regarding building and safety, what audits would you do and what white papers would you write about building and safety? 60 seconds. David, you're first.
Yeah, I've mentioned LADBS several times, especially because it's such a huge revenue generator through property taxes for the city. And we definitely need the additional revenue. But there's, look, these little things at the LADBS and across the city agencies that add up. For example, Marcia, if you go in at 4:30 to get a sewer cap permit, you have the inspectors at the desk willing to help you, but you don't have a cashier unit that can take your money. So for a half an hour, we have city workers just sitting there. Simply staggering the cashiering unit to come in a half an hour later, there's two, we can use and increase efficiency 13% in an LADBS office. There are many programs like that. I was the one on neighborhood council that proposed initially a Saturday
15.
Inspection program, and it has worked wonderful. Homeowners no longer have to take a day off work to wait for the inspector. They just come on a Saturday. So there's many little things like that that collectively can make a huge change.
Stop. Thank you. Paul?
Well, my greatest concern with building and safety, and I don't think it's widespread, but it's too present, is corruption. And we have had cases during my time here where we found that building and safety inspectors have taken bribes, and where they're not direct cash bribes, they're offers of service. And clearly there is something that is in exchange for that. That certainly makes me nervous. We've seen that in some dramatic cases in Bel Air. We've also seen some cases where the actions taken by building and safety inspectors seem somewhat bizarre. And while we don't know about
Paul?
whether they got additional help,
15.
it is certainly questionable.
So,
And so we
Paul,
need ways to audit that, audit some of
Okay.
the practices and see if we can identify
stop.
what leads to corruption.
Okay. Next question, what actions will you take regarding the city's approach to billboards? You have 1 minute. Paul, you're first.
Well, as I think you all know, I'm not a fan of billboards, especially digital moving billboards, because I think they're distractions to the driving public and can contribute to accidents. There are multiple other problems with them. We've been dancing around legalizing them for many years, but we don't seem to be able to come up with a plan. I certainly would focus on the drawbacks and the dangers of them, and could issue a white paper on that. I don't think it's appropriate for an audit. I don't think there's anything to audit, but I think we want to work back in the direction of Marvin Browdy, my boss in 1984, which was to start to eliminate billboards, take down the illegal ones now, and those that are damaged can't go back up.
Okay, David?
I respectfully disagree with Paul on this warranting an audit. You know, we have to figure out how many illegal billboards we have. We have to track it over time from some of the past information. We also have to get a grasp of how much money these illegal billboards are generating, and also an audit of, are these illegal billboard operators donating to the politicians that are making the rules? So no, I do think an audit is critically important. I have a track record of being anti-billboard. Barbara Brody and I 10 years ago went and protested outside of a person's house with others who put up an illegal billboard on Pico and Overland, and we got that billboard down. So with me, you get both the auditor and the information,
15.
a substantive proposal for the city council, and somebody that will actually put the pressure on the city council with your help, with community leaders' help, to actually get some law with teeth in it and finally end this problem after 20 years. I mean,
Time.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, are you familiar with the Metro Communications Network? Yes or no?
No.
David, are you?
I apologize now.
Okay, so here's a little information for both of you about billboards. We need to know a census of types of billboards in the city, fees paid to the city, what fees were not paid to the city and should have been paid, what do the contracts look like, what do the campaign donations look like, and the linkage of billboards to pay to play. Okay, the Metro Communications Network seeks to place 300 digital billboards on Metro's right of way, some of which are shared with the city. There's a website, and I can send it to you if you want, and I think this came from Barbara Brody, but I'm not sure, that we need to investigate what digital billboards Metro is looking to put up. Okay, next question.
And Marsha, can I interrupt for a quick second?
Sure.
One thing that I've noticed with regard to billboards are these quote unquote corner lot advertisements that are popping up. What role would you each see, really quickly, 30 seconds? Have you seen this problem, and what role would you play in addressing it? Marsha, can you get to pick who goes first?
Well, Paul answered first last time. So Paul, why don't you answer again, because it's a billboard question.
Yeah, I think this problem has been going on for years, and I've worked with Mike to try and address some of them. It's been a difficult process, and there's some major legal questions about our ability to do so. I've had some successes and some not. I think as controller, give us the opportunity to shine a light on the issue and hopefully change the laws to make this a more illegal practice.
Okay, David?
Yes, I've seen this all throughout the city, especially, now we see it at Pico and Beverly Glen at the car wash. And I think the courts have been very clear that, local governments and state governments can't regulate political speech, but business speech is regulated by the courts or is allowed to be regulated by the courts. So I do think that this is simply an issue of two things. One, having the city attorney draft the tightest ordinance possible. But number two, and most importantly, is enforcing it, both with fines.
Stop. Okay, we got the enforcement part. Okay, next question. Will you audit the city's approach to oil wells and rigs, inspections, fees paid to the city, contracts, campaign donations, and linkage of oil wells and rigs to pay to play? Yes or no, 10 seconds. Start with David.
Yes, and I also am very concerned that the cost to cap these oil rigs are going to be $300 million. We got to take that into account and deal with it now.
Okay, Paul?
Yes, and I will continue as controller in my efforts to shut down all oil drilling in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay. Next question is, Prop R was passed in 2006 and said that council members' term limits increased to 3 years and various ethics protections were to be enacted. Will you audit whether, or put a light on whether the city has put in place the promised protections, and what will you do as controller to make sure it does? You have 30 seconds.
Who's first?
First, Paul.
I would be happy to audit, and I am not certain that we have done what we had promised. I think we should also audit the promises that we made in the campaign of Prop S, where we promised to do community plan reviews in a very short period of time, and we haven't come anywhere close. So I feel that we've reneged on that as well, and we need to push for that.
David?
So Prop R still bothers me because it was sold as true term limits when we actually had already passed 2 terms, and this just allowed people that wanted to jockey for office to go. Yes, I will audit. You promised that you would pass certain ethics rules. If you haven't done it, I will call you out and hold you accountable.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Mike for public safety. Go, Mike.
Okay, so first on Measure R, for those who don't know, the rules were the city was supposed to restrict lobbyists from making campaign contributions, gifts and becoming commissioners, revise lobbyist registration thresholds, require contractors certify compliance with lobbying laws, and extend elected officials post-employment restrictions. All things that I don't think have necessarily happened. So, first question, and this is going to be, I have Paul as the first question, the first answer on this, just so you know. Do you believe in defunding the police? What solutions can the controller bring to real and perceived issues concerning policing? And that's Paul, let's go first. It's 90 seconds.
Okay, I'm 100% opposed to defunding the police. I'm one of 3 members that voted against even considering the $150 million cut and referring it to a committee. I think there are some things that can be done to reform LAPD, and I'm working with the LAPD now on a use of force database, which I think will be valuable in letting people know, hopefully in real time, how we're doing, where we're improving, where we need to improve. There are also many opportunities for greater efficiencies. Like I mentioned, overtime banking, like I've been pushing for years with some success, hiring civilians to do civilian jobs in LAPD and not having a single sworn able-bodied person doing civilian work. It's much more expensive to have LAPD sworn officers do it. I'll work to reduce time spent in court for traffic tickets, and I'm discussing this with managing judges. I want to see us reduce time for arresting officers in the booking, in the process of booking suspects. I want to see us reopen closed jails at local stations to reduce the amount of time spent driving long distances in rush hour to bookings. I think there are many opportunities, and we will seek them.
Okay.
Hi.
I do not support defunding the police, though I do see a lot of areas where we can get a lot more bang for a buck. For example, we need to use community officers for calls like tenant disputes, loud parties, traffic accidents. We could probably reduce, the amount of calls 10 to 15%. The biggest one is also homelessness and mental health issues. We have great universities with great psychiatrists programs. We need to use those to have those as our first responders going out, so we're not overburdening fire and LAPD. We have to do better training at the LAPD. We saw in some of the disturbances the use of foam projectiles used improperly and without training. We're going to get sued. We're going to pay out $50 million. It's not a good look for the city of LA. And so I want to make sure as controller that training is getting done, and then I will audit it. We have to use new technology, smart technology. We have officers that write a traffic ticket sitting in court for 4 hours to testify. Let's see if we can either get all the officers' trial dates on one day of the month, so the officer only loses 4 hours once a month versus 20 a month, or let's see if officers can testify through Zoom and use the technology. If they're in the patrol car, they have a computer with Zoom on it. Maybe they testify on traffic tickets of that sort. But there's many ways we can improve the LAPD. And the final one is I really want to increase the rescue program.
Okay. Next question. It'll be a 30-second question, and it's going to be, when was the last time you reviewed the LAPD use of force review? What were your takeaways? And if you have not reviewed it, give us your opinion on use of force and how often it occurs relative to the number of citizen contacts that police has. Ty.
So first of all, the use of force is never pretty, and it has to be looked at in a manner of the totality of the circumstances. But to answer your question directly, the amount of use of force compared to contact is probably less than 1/10 of 1%. It is incredibly, incredibly small.
15.
What we also find is that even with training, human instincts and natures still sometimes take control. So Mike, we still have to work hard on de-escalation to make that even small number small.
Okay. Paul? Or did you already get Paul?
No, you didn't.
Okay, Paul, you're up. I checked you off before you spoke. Go for it.
So to answer your question, I have looked over that document. It is the size of a phone book. It's difficult to use. I'm trying to create a use of force document that can be found online that will be easy to configure and maneuver, and people will be able to get a sense of the issues within a few minutes. I believe there is room for improvement, but I don't think LAPD is much worse than other cities. In fact, in many cases, they're better. It doesn't mean we're perfect and can't improve.
Thanks. So, as you both know, police and fire response times are something that I take a strong look at because it deals with public safety. What are the metrics for police and fire response? How will you monitor and report on achieving these metrics? And not just in our area, but citywide, to make sure that there's equity in providing public safety. Paul, you're first.
How much time?
60 seconds.
60 seconds.
Well, one of the difficulties, and you know this because we worked with you and some of your figures and analytics, is that we don't all agree on what those response times actually are. So the department may say one thing, I know you have statistics saying something quite different. But having had an experience with my father who died from a heart attack many decades ago, so no blame for the fire department this time, but they probably came out in 7 or 8 minutes. If you come that slowly to a heart attack, the person is probably already dead if they're going to be, and your chances are slim to revive. So I think the response time is most critical for LAFD, and we really have to get it to where it's under 5 minutes everywhere, every time, if we actually want to be able to save people in the most difficult circumstances.
Ty?
Thank you, Mike. So Mike, and a lot of you know that I've had a problem with the community plan and the fact that the community plan doesn't have specific metrics. We can't continue to say we're going to add another building, and not expect our infrastructure to be taxed. LAFD and LAPD are just part of the infrastructure. So ultimately, we have not added any additional fire stations of any substance. We have 106 fire stations in the city of LA representing 4.5 million people. In contrast, Culver City and Beverly Hills have 3 full fire stations, and they represent, and serve 13,000 residents versus LA 40,000. And so we need to build more fire stations. We're not going to be able to do anything about the traffic.
15.
We got to build the fire stations that allow us to bring the response time. And the truth is, everyone, we're bringing in a tremendous amount of revenue in the city. We just don't direct it to the things that make a better quality of life. Similarly to the LAPD.
So for both of you, this is a race for controller. So if you can focus your answers on what the controller would do to deal with these issues, that would be great, because
Thank you.
general policy, interesting, but what you're going to do to address these as controller is sort of what I'm trying to get to.
Do we answer the question, Mike and Marcia?
Honestly,
10 seconds.
I don't think either of you did.
No.
No, can we answer it? Can we?
I'm gonna move on, and then I think if you want to send a supplemental answer to Marcia, she'll consider putting it in a future email. But just what I was looking for there was, do you know what the metrics are in order to measure response time, and how are you as controller going to monitor and report on achieving those metrics? That was the question. So let's move on. What can the controller do to bring police and community together and also deal with really, really low police morale? Ty, your first 60 seconds.
Every time we can get an officer out of a car and have a good contact, a contact that doesn't even, result from a report of a crime, it helps build community trust. And so, the SLOW program has been an amazing bridge. But I also think we need to find ways to have officers be more involved in the city they police. As you know, Mike, majority of the officers do not live in the city of LA. I think there's a great proposal audit to be done to find ways to have police officers live in the city. I think that'd make a difference. I think it's difficult when police officers come in for 3 days, 12-hour shifts, and then go away for 4 days. So yes, increase community involvement, increase, contact, non-criminal contact. And that's the way you build trust on both sides and improve morale.
Paul?
I think my answer isn't that different. I think we need to head back to the days where we had more community policing by the actual individual officers, and where people in the community really got to know the officers that covered their area. I think it's also important that actually all city employees, that we move to a more LA resident-based workforce. We did that with a program which I really helped to lead, called Targeted Local Hire, where we hired only people who live in the city of Los Angeles, and we picked folks that are the most difficult to hire, like hiring the homeless, hiring former felons. I think that's a critical point as well. Having folks that don't have as much of a stake because they don't live in the community, I think is an important thing to change.
Okay, so
Mike, I did this at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I have the timing wrong on it. So can you ask one more question? May I ask a question on this issue? And then we need to move to data transparency. And
can I do one more admonition? Just
yeah.
The answer, please focus your answers on what you would do as controller. You're running for controller. So even in that last answer, I didn't hear, as controller, here is what I'm going to do to deal with that issue. So if you can both focus on that, that would be great. So one more question, Marcia, I get one more?
And Mike, I would tend to disagree with you on that because
Okay, Paul, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that.
as
Fine,
I'm so,
no,
I'm
give me a
sorry,
call.
but
Give me a call. We can talk about it.
Mike is absolutely right. You guys are not answering the questions. So Mike, take one more question and then I have to ask a couple of questions that were sent in by reps, okay?
Deal. You're the boss. Okay, for both of you, and it's going to be Paul first. It's going to be 60 seconds. Do you think police and fire overtime is a problem or a symptom? Why and what as controller will you do to address it? Paul, you're up first.
Well, I think we need to do a significant audit on both overtimes. I have more concern about LAPD because there's a tendency to go over budget, whether in emergency years or non-emergency years, and not hold them accountable. We have a problem in that we just bank the overtime. This is something that has to change because it's a lose for everybody. The city pays more when they're paid on retirement 30 years later because they're in higher positions. The officers don't like it either because when they do the overtime, they want to be paid at the time. So costs the city more, lowers morale, makes the officers unhappy. It actually has no positive points. And I would focus on auditing that. And I would then suggest that we take 3 years and pay it off in several budget years and eliminate the overtime thing.
I want to repeat my question. Do you think police and fire overtime is a problem or a symptom? Why and what as controller would you do to deal with it? Ty.
I believe it's a symptom. And as controller, I would delve into best practices. So, you know, we all hear stories about firefighters making exorbitant amount of overtime. But as is pointed out, is these people are working and making this overtime because there's nobody else to respond to our fires and our emergencies. So as controller, we really have to delve into the exact reason we are not budgeting properly at, for example, LA Fire Department, and how to reduce the stress on our members, men and women, that are working all these hours that are taking a health toll. So it's an audit, it's a symptom, and we need to fix it, Mike.
Thanks.
Okay.
Go for it, Marcia.
Okay. I agree with Mike. There's too much rambling going on here and you're not addressing the question. You're talking about policy and that is not what the controller does. So please focus your answers on what you would do as a controller. Okay, so as controller, what will you do to eliminate the problem of repeat offenders being set free? Paul, you're first. 30 seconds.
I mean, it's not an issue that we have direct control over. We can only point out and encourage, but I think we can do an analysis of the results of that and whether indeed more crimes are being committed, as I'm saying they are, because of our relatively lax policies that create a revolving door for criminals where they commit crimes, they're set free. By the time they're heard, they have committed many more crimes.
David?
Thank you. As controller, my number one job is to present information that can be used by the policymakers. We have seen now a large amount of tax revenue being stolen. For example, you go into your local supermarket, you'll see your detergent section completely bare because criminals have stolen it. So I will provide both the information of how many times people are being arrested, how quickly they're being released, and the true cost of both to the consumer and to the revenue.
Thank you. Next question. What can the controller do to eliminate the issue of gun violence? I don't want to hear about your past. I want to hear about the future. What will you do to illuminate the issue of gun violence? 30 seconds. Start with David.
Yes. So as we know, ghost guns have made a huge presence in the city of LA. So again, it gets down to conducting the audits to make sure we're presenting the information back to the policymakers. This is a very heated debate area. So it's the job of the controller to present facts and only the
15.
facts and not opinion.
Okay.
Oh,
Is,
oh.
Paul,
Yeah, I'd note that I've written all the ghost gun legislation in the city of Los Angeles to handle a problem we already well know has occurred. Another motion I've suggested, which is something that the controller would do, is to ask the controller,
15.
and it could be me or Taya that winds up getting this request, to audit all of our gun violence programming that we've passed over the decades to see what's being implemented, what's not, what's working, and what's not.
Thank you. Okay. Mike, do you want to go to transparency and data tools and 32? Question
We had some infrastructure questions on,
I know, but you used that time for something else, so.
I'm a bad person. Actually, I stayed within my question limit. Okay, let me just take a quick look to see about the infrastructure stuff, just to catch up. Can I ask 2 infrastructure questions and I'll make it up with something else?
Sure.
Okay. How will you track?
How much? Okay, go ahead.
This will be a 60-second question. How will you track the infrastructure so that policymakers understand all aspects of the infrastructure, including police, fire, road surface, water, power, traffic? Who's next, Marcia? Because I got my list confused on it.
Who the hell knows? Start with David.
Okay.
So Ron's done a great job as controller to bring data to his website and our website, and I would like to continue it. So, very few people, even within the city council, are aware of the ratios of police officers to residents, LA Fire, tree trimming, pothole repair, sidewalk repair. And it's not difficult to maintain that information as controller and make sure it's readily available to both policymakers, but more importantly to the residents, because until residents see on Nextdoor or Ring or a newsletter from CD5 Coalition that this is where we are, here's where other cities are, and here's the investment we need to make it happen. My biggest concern is that we need to invest in these items of infrastructure, and I want to be that voice in the controller's office, constantly reminding
15.
policymakers that we're falling continuously behind. It will never be cheaper today to address these infrastructure problems. It just gets more expensive the longer we just, put our heads under a blanket and don't address it.
Stop.
Paul.
Yeah, I agree that we should be identifying these different areas for infrastructure reporting. Although I don't know that, for instance, with LAPD, that our ratio is necessarily worse per mile or per person than other large cities. I think, in fact, it may be better. In some areas, it may be worse. And I think it's correct that neither the public or the council really knows the answer. I think one of the things we have been doing is we keep building, but we do not add to our infrastructure. And we're probably in violation of laws that have required us to do that. I attempted to get the council to do it and it didn't.
15.
But certainly doing all that auditing and all that transparency would make it more difficult for the city to ignore the need to improve infrastructure.
Okay. Quick yes, no, 5-second yes, no on this question. Will you promise to produce an actual annual infrastructure report as described in the general plan framework and post it prominently on the controller's website? Yes or no, and let's tie.
Absolutely, yes.
Paul?
Of course, yes.
Great. Okay, where am I
Go
going
to
next?
question 32, Mike. Question 32.
When I printed, so it's transparency and data tools. That's where
Yes.
I am. Okay. When I printed it, it cut off the numbers, so my bad. Okay, 10 seconds, starting with, I guess,
Paul.
Paul. Do you consider yourself to be technologically savvy so that you can continue Ron Galperin's move towards using data? Paul?
I would say not personally, but in terms of vision, yes. And I've kept us from having our HRP program open too early and cost us millions of dollars, which I think it would have.
Ty,
Yes,
you do consider yourself to be technologically savvy.
yes.
Great. Next one is a yes, no. Will you pledge to continue a philosophy of transparency? Ty?
Absolutely, yes.
Paul?
Yes, I would continue Ron Galperin's amazing actions in this regard.
Okay, next. Okay, that one, I'm gonna skip the next one, Marcia.
Okay,
Okay, next one is, can you provide us in 60 seconds with 3 innovations you will make in terms of expanding payroll LA, checkbook LA, and any other financial and performance dashboards? And that's going to be Paul first.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure I have an answer for that. We certainly would look to continue to find the places where Ron Galperin's dashboard has not provided enough accessibility and transparency, just because he's the first one to really do this. So there will always be opportunities to expand, especially in the early days of the open data section. But we would certainly look at each of these sections and look at the most pressing needs to provide to the community and to policymakers, and we would add to those areas.
Okay, Ty?
Yes. So it's great to see that an employee makes a certain amount of salary for the transparency part of it. I would like to try to even delve in deeper and put in additional costs that may not be so readily available, like pension costs, healthcare costs, long-term healthcare costs. And so the user will be able to see not only the costs today, but also the cost of that employee going forward and the responsibility of the city treasury for those benefits.
I want to just jump in for a second. I was hoping, that we would hear an answer of more mapping, more data stories, expansion of Checkbook LA, Payroll LA, innovations. Ron made innovations, expanded on Laura Chick. Let's move forward. Let's get more of that. Okay.
But Marcia, I absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, cool. One of the things that happens for us in the community is we negotiate conditions of approval for projects. And what role can the controller, using data, available data, play in making sure that conditions of approval are actually enforced?
How much time?
60 seconds. And that's going to be Ty first.
Okay. So we've seen this, across the city. For example, a restaurant wants to open, require 20 parking spaces. They use a valet service. But what we find is that the same 10 restaurants there's 10 restaurants are using the same valet service. So I'm very interested in documenting the conditions and whether they're being enforced, and more importantly, whether they're realistic out the gate. Also, I'm going to have the city's EIR reports in my office available, hopefully digitalized, so all HOA groups can look at them. And the reason that's important is not only do we have to see the cumulative effect of these conditions, but I also want to make sure that somebody in Boyle Heights knows the conditions that are being imposed on the west side. With that, because look, information is power. And the more information as your controller I can give to community groups, the more we can make sure that not only the conditions are reasonable.
Paul?
I think what seems to me to be a great idea came out of this question, which is, I don't think anyone really follows up on the conditions of approval. I don't know that the city really enforces it. And if we actually created a database of conditions of approval, neighbors would easily be able to look at, especially problem restaurants and other businesses, when they become problems, and look at their conditions of approval and see if lack of enforcement of those conditions are contributing or causing the problems in their neighborhoods. We often only look at those conditions if something needs to be renewed. And then the neighborhood looks and says,
15.
wow, they've never followed up on these conditions at all. And so I think this is a great idea, something we'll need to remember and to create, and a great thing to add to the dashboard.
Fine.
So one of the things that I'm looking for, and Marcia, I'm going to skip the rest of my questions on this, just if you want to ask them, but
I have to, because they were submitted by other people.
and that's fine. But what I'm looking for from both of you is, and this goes with your understanding of technology, how are you going to aggregate information? Because you can't just throw people at this. The only way to do this properly is to use data that either exists or you're going to demand exists. So, and one of the things I'm looking for is, how are you going to innovate using technology to get more bang for the buck? Marcia, you're up.
Well, do they have an answer to that question?
That wasn't a question. That was just a statement. Now I'm moving you on to your
Okay,
question.
well, let's ask that question.
Sure.
Let's see, David, you're first. 30 seconds. How will you answer Mike's
Sure.
question?
So, you know, the scary thing about Google and Facebook and all these companies is they monitor everything we do, and our privacy is probably not very private. The great thing that we have with this technology is that it can gather information very quickly, and we can use it very cheaply to get to the data points that Mike wants to do.
What are you going to do?
So, you know, for example, Long Beach is using a think tank out of Silicon Valley, and that think tank for free broke down every single mental health call in Long Beach. That's the information we can use
Okay.
to make the city better.
Okay, Paul,
I'll just give you an example.
you got 30 seconds.
Right, the city of Los Angeles, as I mentioned, had many affordable housing units in luxury market rate housing. I was told it was impossible to track them, but
15.
ultimately the city came up with a database that actually can track them. I didn't create the technology, but I created the insistence that it wasn't impossible and that we could create such a database and hundreds of affordable units.
Okay, here are a couple of quick questions.
We're on the down.
38. What impediments exist to prevent you? No, let me ask a different question first. What specific innovations will you as controller make in how information is disseminated? I want your innovations. 1, 2, 3. I have
New innovations, right?
new
Marcia?
innovations. Yes, thank
Right.
you.
How much time?
30 seconds. Paul, you're first.
Well, number one, I think there's a lot of information that city employees themselves don't get. And we need to create a process whereby we notify city employees of key changes in the law, of key services that we need to be providing. So I would attempt to create a better system to keep employees in touch with that. I think it's also true that there are a lot of laws that change that the public doesn't know.
Stop. David,
So,
new innovations.
yeah, I think we need to have an app very similar to Nextdoor for city services and functions and availability and data, because, you know, we see that people want the information, and it's great if we have it on our
15.
website. Sure. If we have it on our website, it's still misconnecting. Number two, I think that we have to create an app for employees that is very easy for them to use to report to the controller's office fraud, waste, corruption.
Stop. Okay. What impediments exist to prevent you from executing these innovations? 30 seconds. David, you're first.
Sure. You know, look, there is a culture in the policymakers that they like the way things are now. And so that's going to be the impediment. It's going to be convincing the policymakers that this technology use is actually going to not only make their job easier, but also help them look good to the public when they actually
Okay,
start to address
15.
quality of life.
Paul?
I think one of the impediments, and it partly takes education and stubbornness, is department heads are hesitant to make changes. So when we created the program like targeted local hire, they were afraid to hire people that were previously incarcerated or homeless.
15.
And we had to find probably 10 different angles to push them. Once they started hiring people, they found they were the best employees. But I think you just have to be stubborn and not let departments heads get away without implementing.
Okay, so I just want to confirm that both of you are willing to publish your calendars on the controller's website and the calendars of other city officials and department heads on the controller's website. Yes or no? 5 seconds. David, you're first.
Yes.
Paul?
I'm happy to publish mine. I don't know how legally we'll be able to access the others, but I will do whatever I can in that direction.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go to some quality of life issues. First, tell us if you support or oppose TOCs, transit-oriented communities. That's a yes or no, just to kind of give the platform. Yes or no? Yeah, go ahead.
Who's first?
Oh, who's first? David, yes or no?
I
Support,
do not support TOC.
you oppose TOCs. Paul?
Strongly opposed TOCs.
Okay. So will you investigate TOCs, the housing and parking within these quarters, and the impact on surrounding communities? 10 seconds. Paul first.
I'm happy to audit the impact of TOCs. Legally, I'm not in the position to change it as controller or even as council member.
David?
I will present the cumulative effects of these TOCs.
Okay. So newly constructed commercial buildings are being permitted to reduce 1 parking space for every 4 bicycle parking spaces installed. Okay. This just clogs residential streets with cars because these buildings cannot accommodate the number of autos, and we don't know if bicycle ridership to these buildings has increased or decreased. Tell us how you will illuminate this issue. 30 seconds.
First.
David.
So the use of statistical sampling is one of my expertise, and we can use statistical sampling to take a snapshot of neighborhoods across the city that will give us a really good confidence level of what's going on. So, you know, we may have to use some old school technology of simply
15.
walking neighborhoods at certain times to make to determine how many available parking spots are on the car, and also simply counting how many people are on bikes. If the question is, yep.
Paul?
Yes, I think we need to provide the data to show that it doesn't work, but I think it's very clear it doesn't work. I know there's an application right now for a huge medical building with hundreds and hundreds of bicycle spaces. If there was a place where customers wouldn't bicycle, it was when they're sick going to a medical office. So we have to use the data to back it up, but this is a program that right now absolutely doesn't work.
Okay. Right now, parking on commercial streets is being reduced to add bus and bicycle lanes. This negatively impacts mom and pop businesses. Tell us how the controller's office will illuminate this problem. 30 seconds, start with Paul.
I think the controller's office should take a look and analyze the impacts both to traffic and parking, to business, and the positive impacts of having those lanes. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all issue. It also can have a negative impact on public safety. So there's positives and negatives. I think we have to get the real data to back it up.
Okay, David?
Yes. So my position on this is well known. Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Culver City have built parking structures throughout their cities, and they have vibrant tax base, very vibrant small mom and pop businesses. We don't have to lose parking spots by not building. And so as your controller, I will give you the dollars and cents of what it costs to build these parking structures, but more importantly, the benefit of building them. Long-term tax revenue coming in, good jobs, local businesses.
Stop. Thank you. Okay. DOT's walk and bike count reported that daily commute bike riders will not exceed 2% of road users for the next 15 years. How would you, and by the way, this data was backed up in the journal, it's a reviewed journal of advancement of transportation. I believe that's the name of the journal. So how will you, as controller, illuminate this fact? David, you first, 30 seconds.
Once again, we have the technology, we can access it. We can do both real time and, use technology to determine how many bicycle riders there are and be able to present that information.
Paul?
I think we can use the data, but I also don't think it's that simple, because there are locations where if you have protected bike lanes, you won't impact traffic that much. And yet, if it were easy, people would utilize them more than is being anticipated. So for instance, if you were able to put a protected bike lane onto Venice Boulevard that stretched for miles, I would almost guarantee that you would get more than 2% participation.
So what will you do, Paul, as controller? What will you do?
I think you do the analysis and the facts, and you look at individual situations and help people come to a conclusion about what makes sense and what doesn't.
Thank you. Next question. How will you use the controller's office to help maintain R1 zoning? 1 minute. Paul, you're first.
I think we need to analyze the impacts of the changes that have been made by state legislation like SB 9, which, by the way, I'm currently doing legislation to put in regulations, because until we do follow-up legislation locally, it's completely the Wild West. But we need to both look at the data, look at the problems, and we also have to be willing to advocate. You have a bully pulpit as controller, and I would continue to advocate for local control, whether on the council or as controller.
David?
So the concern with SB 9, 10, and the current ADUs is the taxing of the infrastructure. And so as your controller, it is my job to say, if a block has 10% increase in duplexes, here's the taxing on the infrastructure. Unfortunately, try not to be unbiased, the infrastructure will fail. And then we also have to talk about the cost to upgrade the infrastructure. And I think when people see the true cost and the true decrease in quality of life, the facts will show we should be building on our major boulevards and not threatening single family residents. It's just cost prohibitive.
Okay. Los Angeles City has developed a plan to meet global warming challenges. Given the sense of emergency for climate change, LA's target dates for each desired accomplishment seem too far in the future or vague. By the time a goal is reached, the possibility of impacting climate change will have disappeared. What will you do as city controller to illuminate this problem? 1 minute. Start with Paul.
Well, I would do the same things that I've done as council to some degree, as a council member. I created the Climate Emergency Mobilization Department. I led the effort to get 2,000 cities plus around the world to declare climate emergencies. And I've pushed to make each date more impending. When we first started talking about doing this, we were talking about becoming energy neutral by, I think, 2050.
So what will you do
like
as controller? What will you do as controller?
I would continue to point out the dangers, the progress we're making and the lack of progress, and advocate for earlier dates to take every step that we've made.
Okay,
That we need to make, I should say.
thank you. David, you're up.
So as controller, I see the office also as an incubator for new ideas. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit on the global warming. For example, we still don't require a new construction to have instant water heaters, Marcia. We could give those to the developers, add a $2 small fee on, and the consumer would have better quality life with instant hot water heater, but we're not wasting gas and putting additional methane. There are ways to increase our tree canopy. I will use my office to show these low-hanging fruits to make sure we start attacking this problem.
Okay, here, I'm going to insert a question here. The city has failed to maintain and adhere to LA's legally required general plan and the city's community plans. What should the controller's office do to track adherence to the city's plans? You have 1 minute each, and we'll begin with Paul.
Yeah, I think that's well, certainly a bold statement, which you haven't backed up in the question. But certainly we should be auditing compliance with community plans and general plans. I agree they're not always followed. And so we really need to put the data out, do the analysis, put it on a dashboard. And if the city's not following its own general plan and its own community plans, I think the general public knowing about that and honestly, the council knowing about that will create a lot of that change that needs to be made.
Okay, David?
As you know, I've been in a lot of these fights over the last 25 years in the neighborhood. The bottom line is, I think the only solution, Marcia, is that our community plans have to have metrics. And as your controller, I will put those metrics forward and beg and cajole and do everything I can to get metrics actually into community plans.
Okay, good. Thank
Hey,
you.
Marcia, I want to back up your question with just the West LA Community Plan, which says the quality of life and stability of neighborhoods throughout the West LA community critically depend on providing infrastructure resources, i.e. police, fire, water, sewage, parks, traffic circulation, commensurate with the needs of its population. If population growth occurs faster than projected and without needed infrastructure improvements to keep pace with that growth, the consequences for livability could be problematic. And then it goes on to say that building control should be put into effect until land use designations for the community plan and corresponding zoning are revised to limit development. So Marcia's question was backed up by the rules, just so you know.
Yeah, I didn't read it all because of time, but you guys both know or should know that there's a lot of violations of our community plan in CD5. And I think we as homeowners and residents want to figure out and want the controller to figure out, our waste manager and our corruption manager to figure out how to stop that and how to identify it and then find ways to correct it and not have those behaviors anymore. Okay.
Marcia, I'd like them to be the anti-corruption manager, not the corruption manager.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mike. I'm too passionate, so thank you. Okay, so here's another question. Will you update and expand the pothole report, which is what I call it, the pothole report that's currently on one of the dashboards from the controller's office? 10 seconds, yes or no? Oh, sorry, David, you're first.
I'll say yes. We obviously want to make that as complete as possible.
Okay, Paul, David?
Yes, and also better ways to fix potholes so they don't deteriorate so quickly.
Thank you. So you would include that in your report and in your, okay. Okay, oh, we're doing good now. Okay, The controller's office has been deeply impacted by budget cuts and staffing shortages over the years, including very limited funds for fraud, waste, and abuse. How would you ensure the controller's office has the resources it needs? 1 minute. Start with Paul.
Well, I've advocated for this for every year that I've been on budget committee, and have helped get the controller better funding than they would have received otherwise. But it's a question of advocacy. The fact that I have good relationships with all my colleagues on the city council means I would have a greater ability to push and justify adequate funding for the critical departments, which I would continue to do as controller. And I believe I have the relationships to be successful in that effort and get more extensive funding, not only for waste, fraud, and abuse, but also currently for our human resources program, which I don't believe the controller or personnel departments are adequately funded
15.
to bring it to completion in time to not cause devastating costs in its implementation.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yes, Paul, with all due respect, you're on council now, and the controller's office, and I agree with you, needs more funding, especially at a time when corruption is so prevalent. Truthfully, we are probably always going to have a tight budget in the controller's office. So then it's our job to figure out how to make that dollar spend like two. And as I mentioned earlier, I've had great success in creating intern programs, which not only help people of color and lower economics get some great job experience, but it also is a force multiplier. We will be able to do the audits that we need to do because it's critical that they get done. But as I said, until the residents demand a bigger budget, I will make it work with what I have and a strong audit program with strong interns.
Okay, I want to slip in a question here. Describe an audit that the controller could have done to reveal corruption in DWP. 30 seconds. First is David.
So that's one of your toughest questions, because I've been so impressed with what Ron Galperin has done as controller, especially with his database. But the truth is, I would have never signed a $30 million no bid contract. That would have set off such large alarm bells in my office. We would have stopped it in its track and asked the right questions. And I also think the $67 million legal settlement, the sham class action, as an attorney, the second I saw that there'd been no discovery, that it just had been filed, those would have raised alarm bells.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat difficult to just audit your way towards finding corruption, because again, a lot of that occurs behind closed doors. So you often hear about it after the fact. But certainly the DWP has not been the most transparent of departments, and there needs to be more willingness to open that department up and look at some of its programs.
Okay.
We found
Time.
After the fact.
Time. Okay, so as controller, Paul, what types of DWP audits will you do? 30 seconds. You're first, Paul.
I'd like to see an audit of all their different functions and their effectiveness. I'd like to see an audit of infrastructure, because we have so many pieces that are failing and are way beyond their useful life, such as telephone poles that were put in and expected to last or utility poles that were expected to last for 50 years, and now they may be up for 80 years. Or
15.
Many of our water mains, which occasionally fail with explosive and expensive results. What are our processes to find the leaks, what are best practices in other cities to do this more
Stop.
effectively.
David?
So great question, Marcia. I mean, you really have to go top to bottom with the DWP. So we have to look at who are they contracting with and what consulting services and what value are the ratepayers and the residents getting from that. We also have to, there's things that DWP does really well. You know, when our power goes out, it's normally back on within 2 hours. But we also know that the infrastructure is F-rated for most sewer and water, but I haven't seen anybody do the hard work of figuring out exactly what it will cost and then presenting a proposal over the next 15 years of how we pay for that. But, you know, we also are losing a lot of money because the DWP will tell new projects up to 6 months later how they're going to get power.
Time. Okay. What organizational changes will you make to the controller's office? 30 seconds. David, you're first.
I don't know, Marcia. I have to get in there, meet the heads of each department from audit to payroll and figure out where the problems are.
Okay, Paul?
I agree. I'm not aware that this is a highly problematic department. In fact, I think we have a lot of very capable people and it's well organized. But I think there is no way to really dig in and see what efficiencies are and change until we're there.
Okay. Okay. The city council and mayor's office have been ineffective in acting on many recommendations from the controller's reports. How will you change that? 30 seconds.
Who's first?
First is Paul.
Well, number one, I've worked to change that by finally, after years of advocacy, talking the council president into adding the audits function back to a committee, which is my committee. Without doing that, I don't think there was enough focus on the audits. Obviously, the controller needs to do a certain amount of press to make sure the public is aware of them, but they also have to make sure that the council is focused on them, which is something I've been working on in the last year or so since I've had this back in my committee. It's not an area of focus for the council. We have to make it that.
David?
So number one thing is that we always have to make sure the people of the city of LA are informed of what's going on, because it's really the power of the people that causes change. Number two, everybody knows I have a lot of energy. And so, you know, when we get our teeth into a good audit proposal, I will continually work with council members to make sure that they understand the win-win
15.
of putting the proposals into implementation. Look, at the end of the day, if I make the city council look good, I've done my job, because they will in fact affect the change and you'll get the quality of life.
Okay.
Hey, Marcia.
Yeah.
I just, as projects come up before the current council members, including you, Paul, do you think that you have enough information on the surrounding infrastructure provided to you as part of that council file?
I don't think it's even really much of a consideration for developments. I think we get very little information in that regard.
As controller now for both of you, what would you do to change that so that as part of every project, council members, decision makers are aware of the state of the infrastructure surrounding a given project? And Marcia, who's next? Is it
David?
Ty, go for it.
You know what?
Let's go 30 seconds.
Could you, Mike, I apologize. I got distracted by the chat box. Could you repeat that question? Because there's some great questions.
The chat box is, I'm not sure I can. I'd asked Paul if he had a good feel for the infrastructure surrounding a project. And my question is, as controller, what can you do to better educate decision makers on the state of the infrastructure around a given project so that it can impact the decision?
Sure. You know, Mike, you've known me for many years, and we both agree that the cumulative effect of development is never being addressed vis-a-vis the infrastructure. So again, I have a passion for this type of work. I will make sure that any project going up
15.
The true tax on the infrastructure is known, the cost to actually bring the infrastructure up, and hopefully the decision maker will use that information to make a reasoned decision.
Okay.
Paul? Is Paul
Yeah,
going to answer?
I think it's important that infrastructure is taken into account, and it's definitely not the current practice. I think if there is a way for the controller to help track the infrastructure on given projects, and frankly, to advocate for a change whereby those factors are included in every planning report on a project would be a huge advantage to the community.
Okay. Most Angelenos don't even know that the controller's website exists. How will you change this? We'll start with Paul
And how much time?
and 30 seconds.
I think it has an obvious answer. It needs to be publicized more. I think Ron has done an incredible job of creating it. I don't know if he's done as good a job of getting the word out there as to what it is, what's on it, how you navigate it, and to encourage people to use it. I think through homeowners associations and neighborhood councils, we could communicate that and start the process of residents being more active in their utilization of it and awareness of it.
David?
Yeah, I think this question, echoes what I said earlier, which is you have to have the energy as the controller to go to neighborhood councils, go to HOA groups, go to Chamber of Commerce's, use apps like Nextdoor, and hopefully create a better app for the city. Because wouldn't it be great, Marcia, to instead of having to call 311, you had an app on your phone that you could ask for a bulky item pickup. Technology is so great and so inexpensive now. We can put a lot of smart solutions into an app, not only get information out, but get information in.
Stop. Okay, so does the controller's office have the power to do a survey of homeowners to actually find out the level of awareness of all of this information on the controller's website? David, do you know?
You as the controller control your budget, and
Give me 15 seconds.
Yes, and advocacy and outreach is definitely one of the mandates of the controller.
Okay.
So I feel very comfortable spending a small portion of my budget.
Paul, what about you?
Could you ask that question again? I wasn't clear.
Okay, I just sort of made it up on the fly. Does the controller's office have the power to do a survey of homeowners to understand and get a baseline of what percentage of the population actually knows that the controller's website exists and uses it? Does the office have the power to do that, to measure awareness of the controller's information?
I think we absolutely do, but I would probably have to count on the participation of the individual HOAs and NCs to pass on their own survey, our survey, to their membership and have them participate in that. But I think it absolutely could be done.
Okay. And this specific question, some of these questions came from Ron, and this one specifically did. How do you propose that the city protect itself against potential losses that are created as a result of the 2028 Olympic Games? You have 30 seconds, and David, you go first.
Great question. I've been thinking about the Olympics for many years, enjoyed the 1984 Olympics under Ubroth, which was a success. But as we know, most cities don't have that type of success. The beautiful thing about me getting elected, I'll be in office in January, and we'll start breaking down any public funding backfill that's being made. I don't think the public is truly aware of the liability that they're on the hook for at this moment. And I will look at that right away and make sure that
Paul?
Well, I think there actually is a very limited amount of liability. Much of the costs of every other Olympics, other than this one, have been creating facilities. We have all the facilities here. Everything is built or going to be built. So that leaves almost nothing. There are liability coverages through insurance. We have coverage for some of potential shortfall from the state and the federal government. So it's not nearly what you would think of on off the top of your head, but we do need to watch it closely as controller.
Okay. How can the controller's office help improve the lives of the elderly in the city? 30 seconds. Paul, you're first. And I asked that question as an elderly person.
Well, I might count there too. I think we need to audit our programming. We need to look at auditing what the needs are of the seniors in our community, and we need to look at where the gaps are. The city has had to fill gaps where state programs have discontinued, for instance. But there still may be areas where we could do more, and we need to do the analysis.
Okay, David?
So Marcia, first of all, you'll never be a senior to me. Look, seniors have special burdens, for example, transportation to medical appointments. We have some services. Is it the right fit? I don't know. We need to take a look at it. The biggest issue is public safety. A senior needs to know that they can walk on the streets, walk to the local pharmacy and not be accosted. And so that's going to be a job collectively of all the elected officials. And then we also just have to make sure that we have community involvement. I know I keep on going back to next door.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Ty, for that. Next month I turn 75.
Oh my God, you look
It's
good.
not possible.
Thank you. Oh, talk to me, boys. Okay. Let's go on. Okay. And we're doing good on time. So, Paul, we're going to do some specific candidate questions, and I got some questions specifically for you and specifically for David. So we're going to go to those.
You or me, Marcia?
Okay. One is, Paul, you have 10 city officials endorsing you and 26 labor unions and union PACs endorsing you. This could be seen as a road to special treatment. As controller, will you be in the position?
You will be.
As controller, you will be in the position of auditing your own actions as a past council member and your endorsers' actions. Some in CD5 have seen you take special steps to help your campaign contributors, such as using Rule 245 and with the Museum of Tolerance. Why? Here's the question. Why should voters trust you? 30 seconds.
Wow, that was such a long question. Can I ask you to ask that one more time?
Sure. You have 10 city officials endorsing you and 26 labor unions and union PACs endorsing you. This could be seen as a road to special treatment. As controller, you will be in the position of auditing your own actions as a past council member and your endorsers' actions. Some in CD5 have seen you take special steps to help your campaign contributors, such as using Rule 245 and with the Museum of Tolerance. Why should voters trust you? That's the question. 30 seconds. Oh,
Well, first of all, you can't answer this in 30 seconds. I know Mr. Vahedi has said he won't take support from elected officials in the city. That's something people always say when they can't get the support of people, they say they won't take it. As far as labor unions, I've been a supporter of labor literally from birth with my father walking picket lines, founding a city hall union in West Hollywood, being the labor chair in the state legislature. But people know that I have taken many votes against my contributors, and I've stood up to labor many times as well. And I've done 245s for neighbors over developers and vice versa. It really is all based on 15. The circumstance. And so I would say that it's difficult to find a correlation between my votes and contributions. And in fact, I've gone against developers and friends that have contributed.
Time, stop.
Marcia, can I do
So
a
just a
follow-up on
second.
that?
Just a second. So Paul, do you think there should be an audit of the votes of council member and the use of 245 by the controller's office?
I'm not even sure that you can, because it's been ruled in court cases that you can't audit elected officials. And so I don't know that I would conduct an illegal audit, but so no, I would say there wouldn't be.
Okay, so here's a question for both of you, and Mike, then I'll get to where I want to go. Do you think that, for both of you, do you think that there's anything that could have been done by the controller's office to identify and illuminate the problems? I don't want to use the word scandal, but so I'll say problems in the city attorney's office. David?
Sure. I would like to go back. I respectfully disagree with Paul about auditing 245s. Any resource expenditure by an elected official is available for audit. The fact that they did a 245, who they did it for, did they make a contribution, is public information, and it's right up the controller's alley to publicize that.
Okay.
Getting back to the DWP,
No,
yes.
city attorney's office.
I'm sorry, strike that, the city attorney's office. That would be more difficult because the city attorney being their own elected, I'm not sure we can do an audit on performance and expenditures. I just always want to be candid with everyone. I don't know if we would have caught the sham lawsuit at that point. I think we would have caught it when it went to council. I would have caught it.
Okay, okay. Paul, take 30 seconds for that.
Well, I agree. There's been a legal case specifically relating to the ability to audit the city attorney's office. And that was Laura Chick against the city attorney's office. And the judge ruled that it couldn't be done. So I think that assuming we could is a huge stretch. And I guess I'm out of time.
Marcia, can I do 2 follow-ups to the answers?
Sure.
So Paul, on the question that Marcia asked you, the issue here is not will you vote against somebody, because right now you're in a position to vote and it's very public that you've taken a vote. As controller, you're going to be making decisions on who gets audited and who doesn't get audited, and no one will necessarily know what was behind a given decision. So I think the thrust of Marcia's question was, should somebody be in the position of auditing themselves? And how will the voters know that you're not going to select audits based on your colleagues, the people who are currently your colleagues or people you've worked with?
Or endorsers.
Years. Endorsers. And go for 30 seconds on that.
I could use more, but first of all, there have been 2 controllers who have gone from being city council to controller, Laura Chick and Wendy Gruhl. No one has ever claimed that there were conflicts because they were council members. They all had contributors. They all dealt with issues. It's really a red herring. But I think you are onto something, which is, and it may be done already. I never read policy audits with an eye towards this, but they should begin with why they were selected for an audit as a subject matter. Presumably you select the most important subjects, as I would, and you go from there in order.
Okay.
And then on discussion of the city attorney's office, I didn't hear either of you discussing auditing money spent on outside counsel and correlating that with contributors. Can you both comment on that for 30 seconds?
Yeah, can I go first, Marcia, on this?
Sure.
Because I brought this up with every city attorney. The city attorney has over 400 attorneys, and it doesn't seem that difficult to me for you to always be studying your city attorney's breadth and experience. And if you're falling short in class action, bring attorneys with class action experience in. I think it's completely inappropriate to spend tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money when you should have that ability to operate within your own office. And I've made that clear to every city attorney candidate.
Okay,
Thanks, Marcia.
stop. Okay. Uh, Paul, were you going to answer that question?
Could
Well,
you
I think you already did.
re-ask it, please? If it was any different than what I already answered, please re-ask it.
Okay, this next question is question 59. Okay, Paul, no, 58. David, you have suggested a new Office of Anti-Corruption and Transparency. Do you really believe additional bureaucracy is the answer? 30 seconds.
I actually don't have any recollection of ever advocating for that. I think it's a duplicative matter. And if I conveyed something to the interview panel, I apologize. No, I think a strong city controller that's independent, that holds people accountable, that protects people's money is the best chance to root out corruption. And again, I'll reiterate, we have to have that $50,000 reward line.
Okay,
You know,
that question came from a rep. I didn't create that question.
yes.
Okay,
So
but
no, I do not believe.
thank you for the clarification. Paul, why should the Westwood community believe what you say when you promise to address the homeless situation in Westwood Park and in Westwood, but have failed to make this park safe for usage by families with children? Why should the Westwood community trust you? 30 seconds.
Well, it's a complicated process to remove people, and the city council has added impediments to that. But we are in the process, and I would expect that park to be cleared within the next month or so. The huge spike in COVID has also complicated it.
15.
Otherwise, it would already be complete. But in the next month or so, I think you'll see a substantial difference. We've been doing a lot of outreach, but we've only been able to remove people one by one, and it hasn't really solved the problem.
Okay, stop. Okay.
Hey, Marcia, just for reference,
Uh-huh.
the previous question about Office of Anti-Corruption Transparency came from a January 10th tweet from one of your tweets, Ty, just so you know.
That's okay. I will check who posted that and correct it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, now, David, what question would you like to ask Paul? You have 1 minute to ask the question. You know what? You have 30 seconds to ask the question. Let's make it a straightforward question with no rambling. So you have 30 seconds to ask the question. Paul, you have 1 minute to answer.
This has been such a polite debate that you don't want to ruin the tone. But Paul, you were informed that the drop program was riddled with fraud. And you said at the time it was half-baked, the assertion of it. Do you agree now that the drop program was riddled with fraud and cost over $250 million in taxpayer losses?
I agree with the first part. There was some fraud in the drop program because people were making claims of serious injuries, and then they were caught exhibiting behaviors that would show they weren't permanently disabled, but in fact they were playing a vigorous game of tennis or other similar circumstances. We addressed that problem by requiring that anyone that goes out on leave under drop immediately is terminated from the program if they go out on health leave. Other than that, I don't consider the program to be fraudulent. I think it actually does maintain the sharpest and best minds of the department, which tend to be some of the folks with the most experience. It needs to be analyzed again now that the fraud has been removed, and hopefully the controller would do such an analysis in the future to see whether it's still a good investment.
Okay. Paul, what question would you like to ask David? You have 30 seconds to ask the question, and Paul and David, you have 1 minute to answer. Paul?
The only question that presents itself, I know that you said that you would rely on good relationships to get things done by the council. And it's clear as a controller, you need a good relationship with the council to get your audits heard and advanced, and with the mayor and department heads to have them implemented. How would you do this without significant relationships now?
Great question, Paul. Thank you so much. First thing is, Paul, I believe in people. And I believe when you give people the opportunity to do the right thing, you nudge them to do the right thing, they're going to do the right thing. We're going to see a new mayor. We're going to see a new city attorney. We're going to see a new city controller. And I think we're going to see 7 new city council members. So it's going to be a great opportunity for one of us to get to these council members early and give them all the win-wins of minor changes they can make to just give LA a better shot. And so I do believe, everybody on this board, including you and me, Paul, if you remember 20 years ago, we talked about getting sheep herders phones, and I was very impressed you did that. We became friends. But that's how it is. You reach out your hand, you share the ideas.
15. Okay. Will you be willing to send to the coalition in writing your goals with metrics, if possible, for your first week, first 6 months, first year, and first term? Yes or no? 10 seconds. Start with David.
I would say yes to 1 month, 6 months, but first week, Marcia, I think, just be candid. We're going to get our feet wet, get in there, see where some of the issues are. And I think those metrics are going to change that first week.
Okay, Paul?
I would agree exactly. And I would say you'll need to give some time for that to be produced too, but I'll do it.
Okay. All right. Well, I will send you a follow-up email and give you a date by which I would hope to receive this document. Okay, next question. If you are elected controller, will you serve out your entire term? Yes or no? 10 seconds. We'll start with Paul.
Yes, of course. I'm at an age where I don't expect beyond the 8 years of my time to seek other offices, and this will be my last office.
Okay, David?
This will be my last office too.
Okay, fine. Thank
Hey,
you.
Marcia, before you launch into the next section, just so you both candidates know, if you can see it, this is, we were talking about, well, my background's kicking in. We were talking about use of force and having data. Just so you know, there is a document. It's very data rich. It's the use of force year-end review, and it has all the information you would ever need to know. So it's something you probably should both look at.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, that's good. Mike, is there a website where it can be found?
I have a physical copy, but I'm sure it can be, I'll try to find one and send it to you, Marcia, and you can blast it out.
Yeah, because I think coalition people want to read that also.
And you also you already mentioned that in the previous question. I've looked through it already, but I'm trying to make it more user-friendly with the LAPD.
Yeah, I mean, it has, we'll do this offline, let Marcia get to her questions, but it has some very easy to read graphics and data. And I think, Ty, you mentioned the small percentage of issues that happen relative to customer contact or constituent contacts. And when you put it in that context, it's 26 issues came up out of 1.692 million constituent public contacts. So, the information is really useful to see.
Yeah, but I would also say that although proportionately that's a small number, for the person who's involved,
Yeah.
It's a big number.
One bad incident is one too many.
Yeah, so that should be looked at. I look forward to reading that. Okay,
Right.
Here's a question from Barbara Brody. Hi, Barbara. I love your questions. Okay, I'm going to read it, and then we'll see if it was already answered. On the issue of LAPD efficiency and cost effectiveness, How has the drop program continued over time when there have been a number of LA Times reports documenting serious abuses of the program? Okay, Barbara, is that to a specific person? Unmute yourself. Is that to a specific person? Well, Paul, why don't you just take it?
Yeah, I assume that's to me.
That's fine.
I agree there have been abuses.
30 seconds, Paul.
The city has, and I have particularly worked to address them. So I would say the abuses are largely eliminated, if not completely eliminated. But the efficacy of the program, whether it's still of value as a cleaner program, still is up for debate and needs further analysis. So once we've had a few years of data of a cleaned up program, we need to do the analysis to see whether it's still worth maintaining.
Okay, Ty, do you want to comment?
Sure, I do. So I did support and voted for the drop program when it was presented to us. And I still believe it's a good program if it's managed properly and the fraud is eliminated. Just imagine what we could have done with that $250 million. More importantly, we do need to take a look at whether command officers should be in this program, Marcia, because what we want to do, we have enough young lieutenants with great ideas and energy to move up the ranks. We should study whether it makes sense to have captains and commanders. Finally, it is a voter approved initiative, so we'd have to go back to the voters to eliminate it.
Okay.
By the way, I have to clarify one thing. The $250 million is not the cost of the fraud. That's the cost of the whole program.
Okay, I'm going to just let that rest. Okay, this question is from Stacy Shore. On the subject of achieving success in providing affordable housing and more housing that is much needed in this city, developers and nonprofits have continually complained about wasted HHH money, wasted city resources, and lengthy delays in getting permits and city assistance in developing new housing. As controller, how do you propose to address this issue that money is being dedicated as the taxpayers wanted, getting the financial assistance to affordable housing developers, and what changes would you make in how we are doing things and doing what we are doing now? But as controller, what would you do to provide I'll say oversight for this? Not policy, but what would you as controller do? You have 30 seconds. First, David, you go first.
Terrific. Thank you, Stacy, so much. So as I've mentioned before, we do have a major problem in the LADBS and other entitlement agencies that are costing us a lot of revenue by the delays, and it's increasing carrying costs tremendously. As I also mentioned, I'm against the TOC because what it does is plop large projects in one small area. We're seeing it on Westwood Boulevard and so forth. We have a tremendous amount of mixed retail that we can build. We just don't have to build it as dense as TOC. So,
Paul?
Well, I think we need to do a lot more analysis on our HHH program and our other affordable housing programs. We need to look at the different tiny home projects and why some have cost so much more than others, and try to only use the most cost-effective programs. We have to look at modular housing, which has begun to be done, and I believe my project was the first to do it, which can dramatically reduce costs. What are all the best practices? And we need to streamline the system.
Okay, next question. In CD5, we have areas that have been promised open space through the community plan updates, and that open space has never been provided. There is money in linkage fees accounts, and our community has never received an answer about how much money is available in any such park linkage fee accounts that were a result of in lieu fees by developers. Would you pledge to be fully transparent and make such accounts public and assist in the making sure that money is available for the intended purpose? This is a yes or no question. So take 10 seconds and answer it. Paul, you're first.
Absolutely, and we should be auditing and making accessible the locations of all of those funds.
Okay, David?
Not only linkage fee, but Quimby fees and fire hydrant fees. There's many accounts and the money's sitting or being wasted.
Yeah, and this also goes to the question of special accounts, designated accounts in the city. There's like 187 of them or something. Ron Galperin did a audit on this, but my question to you is, do you think this audit went far enough? David?
So you know what, Marcia, to be candid, I'd have to go back and refresh my memory on that audit. But I do real quickly want to say the Quimby
10
fund,
seconds.
yeah, can only be used for 5 years and they have to be returned to the developer. So if we don't use it, we lose it. We need to look at it and make sure we're using it.
Okay, Paul?
I think there could have been more advocacy. Once we have those funds, we really need to push to have them utilized. And I don't think there was that push to do that.
Okay, so would you audit all this?
I would, and I would advocate for all those funds to be spent because a lot of them just are still sitting around, even
Okay.
post-audit.
Okay,
Hey, Marcia, just 2 examples real fast. So there was a fire hydrant and main replacement fund that was completely rated by the council. And we have other funds that just, I know in Cheviot Hills, they have funds that they're trying to get a hold of. So the question is, how can you use technology to let people know what resources they have available, whether it's for their parks or whatever? 30 seconds each. Who's first?
I'll go first. So, I mean, that's a great question, Mike. I mean, look, we can go through the 186 funds and find literally hundreds of millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, when it's buried deep into a book this thick, right, it doesn't do anybody any good. And so really, you want your controller to be somebody that has shown a pattern of caring about infrastructure and good quality services. And that's the controller that's going to go find those money, make it public, and then let the stakeholders know that that money is available.
okay.
So that's how you solve that problem.
Paul?
And I think they also need to be accessible in a district by district way. So the CD5 constituents, for instance, the council member would be given a list of funds and how to access them. So would the community. In some cases, it's the community that holds it up too, where the community doesn't give the input or won't give a decision on where they really want the funds are. And so the council member doesn't just spend the funds. But
Okay,
I think if there was more awareness, those funds would get spent.
okay. Yeah, I mean, this is like a bank account. Each of these is like a bank account at Morgan Stanley. And so we need to know how much money is in the bank and how it can be appropriately used, who has the right to use it, and move that forward. This has been a very overlooked area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next question. This is from Stacy. In many parts of CD5, we have had increased density through TOC and density bonuses, which have put a tremendous demand on our aging infrastructure. Palms area has frequent brownouts and loss of electrical supply, as does Rancho Park. How do you utilize the controller's office to find funds that can be used to meet our infrastructure demands in CD5 that are being unaddressed now by our current city council members? Paul, you want to go first on that? 30 seconds.
Do me a favor and repeat that question again. There's too many parts.
Oh, don't do that.
I can go. Paul, it's on the chat.
Don't do that. Please just repeat the question.
All right, it's on, Ty's right, it's on the chat. In many parts of CD5, we have had increased density through TOC and density bonuses, which has put a tremendous demand on our aging infrastructure. In Palms area, we have frequent brownouts and loss of electrical supply, as does various areas in Rancho Park. How do you utilize the controller's office? How do you utilize the controller's office to find funds that can be used to meet our infrastructure demands in CD5 that are being unaddressed now by our current city council members? That is the question.
Okay, well, first of all, I agree that
30 seconds.
TOC doesn't address infrastructure. It just contributes to the problem. But even if we weren't increasing density, our infrastructure is already woefully inadequate.
What would you do as controller? Is the question.
What you need to do is as controllers, you need to do analysis of the budget as well. And you need to find places and find efficiencies to allow you to put more funds into infrastructure.
Okay, David.
Stace, yeah, I've said this before and I'll say it again. You know, you have to have metrics within your community plans. And as your controller, if you give me the platform and the bully pulpit, if we can't get that actually implemented into the community plans through the city council, let's go to the voters, right? We see all these JJJs, Rs, whenever it suits the politicians, they seem to get a proposal on the ballot and hoodwink the voters. It's time to go back to the voters. Everybody gets this. Infrastructure is important to quality of life. Let's go ahead and put it on the ballot.
Okay. This is from Linda Blank. The communities, let me see if this was already answered. The communities need to know what Quimby funds are available for their use. That information is not now readily available. What will you do? Okay, so they already answered that question. Okay, here's another question. In the host agreement, the city of Los Angeles has financially signed a full guarantee. We are on the hook for any shortfalls. As controller, will you guarantee full transparency about the agreement the city signed with LA 28 and the financial implications? Paul, you said we weren't on the hook, so you take this question first, 30 seconds.
Oh, I absolutely don't say that. I just think the massive amounts that other cities have lost, we're not in the same danger, especially since we don't have to build huge multi-billion-dollar facilities. But we are on the hook if there is a modest shortfall, and we need to make all of that public, all of our agreements public, and track it all the way through to the actual holding of the Olympics.
Okay, David.
Look, we can't afford to lose $1 on the Olympics. And, you know, there's a lot of money involved, and being a CFO, being an attorney, being an experienced auditor, I think, you know, I'll get to the bottom of where our risks are, where we can limit that risk, and hopefully have successful games.
Okay, this question is for Paul. I don't know who it's from. Why should our community of West Side Village support you when you accepted money for your campaign from the developer of a major project that is proposed, and you dismissed our concerns by saying you didn't know if you accepted money from him? But that's permissible since you're running for controller. This is a bad developer that you should know, that you know has refused to engage with our community. So I guess the question is, why should the community of West Side Village support you? Why should the community of West Side Village support you when this has occurred? Paul?
I am pretty sure this is incorrect. I know who you're referring to. I have not taken a contribution from him any time during which this project was being developed or now actually moving forward as developed.
Okay,
So I don't know where the mistake is. There are other contributors that have a same last name, but are absolutely not him, not related to the project. If it's the correct one, not even on speaking terms with each other. So I think this is a complete.
okay. Oh, Paul, who's the developer that we're talking about?
I think we're talking about Jack Narofshan.
Okay, I don't know.
And I have taken pains to make sure I haven't received contributions from
Okay.
him.
So whoever asked that question, can you put in the chat box who you think the developer is? And then we'll get some clarity. Okay, but in
And
the
if you can show
meantime,
that
Marcia, it's in the chat.
if you can show I've taken a contribution during this campaign, please.
it's in the
forward
chat
it.
already? Okay, I'll get there. Okay, this is from Terry Tippett. 4118 signs are up around Westwood Park saying beginning February 3rd, no more sitting, sleeping around that area. Okay, thank you for that information.
Hey,
Barbara?
Marcia?
Yeah.
Just tied to that, Paul, just a specific question. The Park Advisory Board held a special meeting to talk about that 4118 posting for Westwood Rec. And we corrected the address to be the park. And your office never fixed it. And the signs that are up still cite an address, I think, on Rochester. How did that happen?
First, I've heard about it, so I can't answer how, but I don't believe that would slow us down at all.
Okay, that's not a
we'll correct
controller
it,
question. Okay, that's a good question, but it's not a controller question, so we're
We'll
gonna move
correct it
on.
if it's indeed true.
Okay, is there anything that can be done with LAPD and LAFD related to vaccine refusal that whereby the controller's office can show the entire cost of COVID to the city, including disability costs, overtime for officers who must cover for their ill and covering peers? What could the controller's office do to present data that pushes back against the challenges to the city's vaccine requirement? David, you go first, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
Barbara, thank you for that question. It's absolutely frustrating that 2 years in the pandemic, we're still having people that are anti-vaxxers. Unfortunately, while I have a lot of answers of things I can do as controller, I can only document the added expense and give that to the policymakers, give it to the residents, but I'm not sure that's going to be a magic bullet to get somebody to get vaccinated.
Okay, Paul?
I think that's the same case. As controller, you can primarily provide the information and data and analysis. As council member, we are beginning to fire people that aren't going along. There's a huge cost to the city without a doubt. And we have to protect our employees and our constituents.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow on that 4118 question. As controller, would you audit or something the enforcement of 4118? David, 10 seconds, yes or no?
Yes, but I would hope 4118 would change to make it that each city council member could just act without the entire approval of the council.
Okay, Paul?
I don't think that's an issue where an audit would be of great value. I think it's just something that we need to enforce, and it's there for a reason, and it's a good tool for the city to get some of the worst problems under control.
Okay, I would offer that we can say we can enforce it, but if we don't have the information as to whether it is being enforced, that's what needs to be posted on the controller's website, that fact that it is or isn't being enforced. I want to go back to this question of West Side Village on the contractor.
I know it's not part of the question, but I think you need to understand 4118 is a tool for council members. There's no requirement to enforce it in every area that's been called out. So there's nothing really to audit. There's no expectation of a consistent enforcement. It's a tool for council members to get people to accept services and otherwise to move out of dangerous areas.
Okay, and Paul, I think you need to understand that the question is really, to what extent is this tool being used effectively so that we can address the homeless problem intelligently? Okay, I'll just let it go at that. Okay, let me go back to we have a few minutes. Okay, Paul, just so you know, the developer is Jack Narafshan, and his nephew is working on the project. There's your information, okay? Next question. The loss of firefighters and police due to vaccination and COVID has both operating in a degraded mode, meaning that basic cars are not being cut and rescues, trucks and engines are being shut down.
So Marcia,
Okay.
the question is, no one is being told that their local fire station is shut down, or that their basic car has been eliminated during this crisis. As controller, what would you do to keep people informed on a real-time basis of loss of public safety like this?
30 seconds. David, you're first.
Thank you so much. I think, this is the time where we have to have the expenditure of controller funds to have alerts out to constituents. We're going to have the metrics of where it should be in deployment and personnel. But yeah, this is an emergency, Mike, and we need to alert all constituents.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a great idea. It would have been even more valuable 10 years ago or so when we were having frequent brownouts. So you would often have a station shut down, and it would be helpful for constituents to know that the next fire station 3 miles away would be serving them. So I think that would be
15.
helpful. I think that would be helpful, both on a general basis and on a real-time day-to-day basis.
Well, it's always nice, Paul, that when we talk to you, we give you good ideas. So
Hey,
that's
I've used them from you.
I gave the idea.
okay. Thank you. All right. So it's 12:29. We're approaching the bewitching hour. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. So first thing I want to do is thank our candidates for showing up and taking the time and for their answers to our myriad of questions. I want to remind all coalition reps to email me your candidate preference at marcia.sells@gmail.com. I'm sure we'll have additional opportunities to visit with you. Thank you to everyone. The next forum is February 26th for city attorney. So you have almost a month to relax. But send me your questions for city attorney. I'm actually going to be gone for a month, so I want to make sure that I get your questions as soon as possible. And if you have any comments or issues about today's forum or previous forums, by all means, email me. And here, Paul, Rod Narafshan, that's who has contributed to you. Rod, R-O-D, Narafshan. Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Marcia, just to remind everybody that this video will be posted on the website probably within 3 or 4 days.
Okay, and you have all received the newsletter, so you have a lot of augmentation in terms of what we heard today. Thanks to everybody for being here, all of you guys. I'm so in awe that all of you are willing to take your time as volunteers in your neighborhoods to participate. So thank you so much. And I look forward to receiving your emails for your candidate preference. marcia.sells@gmail.com. You know the address. And it's 12:31, so I'm going to shut down the meeting. And thank you again. Mike, any other comments?
No, just thank you for all showing up. It's good to see some of our brand new CD5 members. Cindy, I see you there. So welcome. And Jim O'Sullivan, welcome. It's good to see you.
We're happy to have you.
And I'll see you all next time.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye, Paul. Bye.